This presentation is to showcase my particular project, which is called Preparing Effective Citizens, Developing Essential Skills in Social Studies Education. So the problem that exists right now in social studies education is that it doesn't prepare students and adults to be effectively advocate for themselves and their beliefs in our current political system here in the United States. There's a lot going on in American politics. Individuals have to learn how to navigate political bias as well as misinformation and a ton of other areas. And what has happened is that individuals with high socioeconomic status and or individuals who are well educated have a lot more influence over policy issues than individuals of low socioeconomic status and who are not as well educated. And the groups that really have not received quality social studies education are individuals who are coming from minority backgrounds or from low socioeconomic status. As a result of this, there's significant differences in the type of practices that educators use within the classroom. The quality of instruction in these types of classroom is much lower in these districts, with the majority of students who meet these characteristics. And as a result of that, the content that is taught doesn't prepare students to engage in modern politics in the United States because they don't have the necessary skills to be able to advocate for themselves. So the research, in order to effectively engage in the current U.S. political system, students need to develop a democratic skill set where they learn how to be informed voters, involved citizens, and develop a respect for democracy. When it comes to informed voters, this is about developing their critical thinking skills and their reasoning skills. When it comes to be involved citizens, this is to get students actively involved in their communities and within politics. And for developing a respect for diversity, this is teaching students to be tolerant towards one another, especially different cultural beliefs, ideas, backgrounds, all those types of things, as well as when arguments happen, because they are going to happen. When arguments come up that it is about the issue or about a specific policy and it's not directed at the individual themselves. And these are skills. There's some things that have to be practiced for students to learn them. It's not going to happen on their own. And if they're not learning it in school, there's not a lot of opportunity for some of these disadvantaged groups to be able to learn that in the real world. As a result, educators need to use the principles of constructivism and to develop authentic learning experiences and combine those types of things with current best practices in social studies education to promote the development of these particular skills. So, what are some of those best practices? How do we develop that democratic skill set? In order to do this, to develop students' abilities to be informed voters, involved citizens, and develop their respect for diversity, social studies educators have to regularly incorporate current best practices within social studies education into their daily routines. Not do this every once in a while. This needs to become a habit within that particular classroom. This refers to the disciplinary critical thinking skills. Critical thinking skills are not transferable. They're specific to each particular discipline. The same type of critical thinking you might do in a math classroom, you're not going to do that same kind of thinking in a history classroom or a government classroom or an econ classroom. There are unique critical thinking skills to each of the different disciplines. Social studies critical thinking skills are going to be able to translate a lot towards being prepared and actively involved in government and in society. Specifically, I highlighted the idea of historical thinking, this particular critical thinking set that focuses on questioning, on sourcing, on contextualization, corroboration, and close reading. Another important thing to include in a social studies classroom is classroom discussions. This is not just, okay, a teacher asks a question and one or two students respond. The classroom discussions are where students are beginning to answer each other's questions and be able to push back sometimes and have true student-to-student discussions where the teacher is at best a moderator that we're trying to go for. Discussion of current events, being able to connect what students are learning in the curriculum with things that are going on in the real world. This is extremely important because it allows students to be able to see connections with history, with other parts of the curriculum and what's going on in the real world right then, and use that to be able to develop those critical thinking skills even further. Having students engage in simulations where they're going to play out particular roles can be extremely helpful and extremely beneficial in developing some of these different democratic skill sets, as well as getting involved in service learning projects. This is especially important when it comes to being an involved citizen, as students get their hands dirty. And actually, research has shown that there's a lot of willingness for students to do these types of things, especially in the local community, to be able to be actively involved, and that can lead to major benefits for not just the student, but for the community as well. So the main part of my project, though, is going to be creating a curriculum map that highlights a lot of these different types of practices. And what curriculum mapping does is it provides a framework for educators to plan out their instruction in their classrooms, gather data on what relevant exposure their incoming students have had to some of the prior knowledge and skills, and then be able to use that to prepare for instruction. And again, that's kind of the main purpose, is to identify what content and skills are going to be taught and when that instruction is going to happen, and then to finally match up the content and the skills with the assessments that students are going to be actually taking. There's a ton of positive impacts for curriculum mapping: higher test scores. Educators can assess incoming students' prior knowledge and skills before they even get there, sometimes by looking at what they have, as well as with pretests, identifying gaps, eliminating unnecessary repetitions, and a truly really beneficial one is looking for opportunities for cross-curricular learning by looking at different disciplines, maybe an English classroom or a math classroom or something like that, and being able to make connections there so that students are learning about similar things at the same time of the year. When it comes to designing a curriculum map, the focus has always got to be on what is being taught within a particular classroom. This is referring to disciplinary content, this is referring to skills, as well as the assessments that students are going to be taking. I made a special focus to emphasize content area best practices, and I really emphasize valuing learner engagement over superficial coverage of material. A lot of the state standards have a ton of things that are supposed to be covered, and it's impossible to cover all of those different things within a semester or a year-long class on a lot of occasions. So rather than trying to just get a 10,000-foot overview of things and not really get any depth, my curriculum map that I created here really focused on developing skills that are going to be able these students are going to be able to use later in life. In order to be successful with curriculum mapping, one of the major things is how it's going to be integrated into the district. How is it going to be utilized? How is it going to be emphasized? And with this, in order for curriculum mapping to be successful, it has to include teachers within the process early, and they have to be some of the main drivers and main workers behind it. There has to be adequate and regular training for those teachers who don't know what curriculum mapping is and how to go about it. And the big emphasis is constant support and leadership from administration. If the administration is not behind it, that's the building principal, that might be the superintendent, other people involved, maybe a curriculum director. If they're not behind it and pushing it and helping teachers to fill in the gaps in the teacher's knowledge about curriculum mapping, then curriculum mapping is just not going to be successful. So the objectives of this project were to create a curriculum map for several different social studies courses that would demonstrate how social studies educators can use best practices to plan for instruction, can prepare students with the necessary knowledge and skills to develop that democratic skill set, and to create a document that educators, administrators, students, parents, all these different people and other stakeholders who are going to want to know what is going on and what students are going to be learning in a particular course can easily identify that. In order to do this, requires that curriculum maps are well organized and written so that it can be easily interpreted by everybody involved. And that's one of the things that a lot of curriculum maps lack, is it might be written so that educators and administrators can easily interpret it, but your average person may struggle because of the language that's used. It's got to be written in a way that's very easy for everybody to understand what's going on. The different components for this particular project, the main part of the project is going to be two different curriculum maps. One for a world history classroom, one for a government classroom. I intentionally chose these to emphasize how preparing democratic skill set in a social studies classroom looks in a history-based course, as well as a course that's going to be really focused on the idea of politics. I designed these again with best practices and emphasizing the development of that democratic skill set. I organized it to show how those best practices can be implemented with a classroom. And I also included a section I titled Developing for Democracy. And what this does is it gives some different examples of how different lessons and activities and projects that students are going to engage in with each particular unit help develop those particular democratic skill sets. This section are just that, examples. It is not exhaustive of everything and every way in which students are developing for democracy within that particular unit, but it highlights some of the ways that it does. Some of the other components within my particular project were several different rubrics that can be used to help evaluate student progress in their skill development, several pre-tests that can help social studies educators evaluate incoming students, as well as some sample assessment questions to demonstrate how some of those students will be assessed. So, curriculum mapping. Within a curriculum map, I created 2 different course overviews to kind of just give a general idea of what that particular course is about and what it's going to be covering. So here you can see this is one on the left here is for American government. The one on the right is for a second semester of world history. World history is usually a course long or a year-long course. It's broken up into 2 different semesters. American government is just a semester-long course. It includes a calendar map that kind of shows when the different units are going to be taught and how long that's going to be those units are going to be spent on. And those are really important to help demonstrate the time spent on the different ideas. Same thing going over here for the world history. This is one of my unit maps for world history. Each unit gets its own curriculum map just like this. Here it has at the top the course name and what unit it is. Who it was developed by, the time frame which it's going to be on, and how long the course is going for. Essential questions for what this students are going to be looking into and how they're going to be analyzing things are going to be over here. The key concepts within that particular course are going to be listed here. But the biggest part that I really want to emphasize, because it really talks about the way these best practices can be introduced and used within a social studies classroom, is the student engagement section. And what this focuses on, it looks at each of the different best practices and it starts to list out these are the different ways that students are working and using this particular best practice. So here you have all the different ways and the different documents that they're going to be analyzing. This can relate to different text documents, it can relate to photos, there's charts in here, there's a lot of different things that can be fitting under that document analysis. And again, a lot of those documents are going to help them develop their critical thinking skills. There's some geography areas related here. Geography is a huge part of world history. Classroom discussions, different prompts that are being presented to students throughout to try and generate discussions, different group activities and projects or presentations that they're going to be engaged in, different videos that we're looking at and then analyzing and discussing. If there's a simulation, that is also included. So here, in this particular unit, I'm talking about the World Wars. We have a Treaty of Versailles simulation where students actually negotiate part of the Treaty of Versailles. And then at the end here, I make a note that current events are going to be brought up as they fit content. And the hard part about current events and kind of planning for instruction is current events are kind of changing. Sometimes you might know ahead of time, yep, these are going to be some current events I can talk about. A lot of other times things come up as the year and as the semester goes. And you can't plan for that. You can't anticipate those types of things from happening. So you need to be able to discuss those and have the freedom to discuss those as they come up. And again, current events is one of the most important parts of helping prepare students, and including current events in there, and prepare students to be able to connect curriculum to what's going on in the world today. In addition to that, there's a section that talks about assessments, what assessments those students are going to be able to be taking throughout this particular unit. And there's that development for democracy, where I look at an informed voter, an involved citizen, and respect for democracy, and examine the different ways in which students are engaging in those particular skills and developing those skills. The last part are the Michigan State standards and what standards are being covered by this particular unit. Here's one for American government. This is my second unit, Constitutional Principles, that focuses mostly on the idea ideas of the Constitution itself, and helping students understand what is in the Constitution. Same kind of setup as the previous one: essential questions, key concepts, student engagement as well. All the different ways and different parts of the Constitution and other curricular parts here that are a part of this. You can see in here I have several political cartoons that are included in there. Well, and these types of things, especially with like an American government course, these things should be updated as things happen. And curriculum maps themselves need to be updated every single year to reflect what students are actually learning within the classroom. That is the whole purpose of curriculum mapping, is to reflect what students are really learning. So they need to be updated on a regular basis, or they start to grow outdated and they're no longer reflective of that particular learning. I just wanted to thank you for taking some time out of your day to watch this video and the summary of my project. I hope that if you were a social studies educator, you're able to take some of these things and implement them within your own classroom. If you're an administrator, that you would consider curriculum mapping and getting some of your teachers to engage in this process so that you can better prepare your students for democracy. Thank you.